Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Wrestling Marks of Excellence here on 96.9 FM and 1340 AM. Now to today's show. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Marks of Excellence here on Fox Sports Radio 1348 and 96.9 FM. We know that it's been a minute, but I'm with me as always, the Wizard himself, nephew Corey. What's going on, Wizard?
What is going on? It is fantastic to be here.
What's up? I got my main man, Champ Creed. What's going on, Champ?
1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. I don't know what I'm gonna say, but I'm still a son of a gun.
Got you, man. It's good to have us back together again. We're getting ready to go into a series that we want to talk about. What if, right? There have been a lot of things in the world of pro wrestling that's always been what if. What if this would have happened and that would have happened? Or what if this person would have came to this organization? And what if this person didn't leave that organization? So what we're going to go into a series here on the Wrestling Marks of Excellence here is talking about what if. And we wanted to start this one off with a big what if. It is Black History Month. As you know it, shout out to Dr. Shabazz. Well, rest in peace, Dr.
Rest in
Shabazz,
peace.
that we normally have here on February on Wrestling Marks of Excellence. But we're going to go with the what if. In August the 8th, 1992 in Baltimore, Maryland, history took place. Ron Simmons became the first African-American champion by defeating Big Van Vader. The question tonight and what we're going to talk about is what if Ron Simmons had not won in 1992 in Baltimore, Maryland? Who would have been the first African-American champion? And I'll start with you, Wizard. If Ron had not won in 1992, who would have been the first African-American champion in pro wrestling as we call it today? Because Ron is, we say pro wrestling.
Here's why that's
Who's your pick?
Here's why it's tough. I am going to give a pick. But I would say it's tough because are we answering this based on if other factors in pro wrestling didn't happen or specifically just that one and the rest of history is the course of history?
Just that one and the rest of history is the course of history.
So you're saying just hold on, Glenn, you're saying just that particular title or in the realm of pro wrestling overall?
Realm of pro wrestling, it doesn't have to be the WCW title, but in the realm of pro wrestling, because when you look at Ron Simmons as being the first African-American champion, we don't talk about just WCW. We talk about wrestling as a whole.
Okay. Then if we're going to go that route.
I mean, am I wrong? But that's how he's recognized, right? It's not.
Yeah.
Is the first African-American champion in pro wrestling.
Yes. So all intents and purposes, I'll stay safe. And see, even me saying I'm gonna stay safe, it's hard just because, like I just asked, is because of everything else happening in wrestling, staying the way it is, it's kind of hard to pick somebody out. But I'm gonna stay safe and say Ahmed Johnson because I just feel like that's the trajectory we were going on. A dark horse in that is if Ahmed didn't work, maybe Charles Wright. Godfather, Papa Shango, somewhere one of those gimmicks may have somehow landed him a world championship. But I am going to stay safe and say Ahmed Johnson. I just feel like, granted, if things didn't go the way they did with him, I feel like he's the first African-American world champion if Ron Simmons is not. He most certainly would have been the first in WWF at that time. We'll talk about it throughout the show because I'm sure it's going to come up. Do you give that to Rock? Do you recognize Rock as an African-American world heavyweight champion? Some do, some don't. We'll get into that, but I'm going to stay safe. I'm going to say Ahmed Johnson. I just feel like that package and that build at that time in 95, 96, I really think he was the guy that was going to do it.
All right, Champ. Who's your pick? If it had not been Ron Simmons, who would have been?
Okay, so I'm gonna name my pick, but I do want before I name my pick, I want Wizard. I want you to give us the landscape of how. Actually, no. Let's do this for the listeners that may not be, apt to what happened. Tell us the conditions in which the trajectory was made and established, I should say, with Ahmed Johnson. Tell us what took him away from that trajectory
Mm-hmm.
last, and then
Mm-hmm.
before that, I'm going around here. Tell us what would have the landscape have been like?
Okay, so you have this Hulk of a man, an African American man, which already you're in slim pickings with in the WWF in 1995. Excuse me. WWF is in the midst of its new generation era and making new stars. And mind you, they're coming off of just getting off or escaping the federal government, namely Vince McMahon, in the steroids era. So right now, your top guys are 240 or less. Your Shawn Michaels, your Bret Hart. Granted, Diesel, Sid, they're still there, but they don't have those look. Well, Sid did, but I guess Sid was relatively clean. I mean, as far as we know. But for the most part, your Diesel, they were few and far between. But Diesel didn't exactly have that look of, oh my goodness, he's on steroids. But then again, a lot of people didn't, and were on it. Anyhow, you have Ahmed Johnson coming in. He's African American. He's huge, and it's at a time where you want to have the ability to put a positive spin on the African American image in your company, because this is at a time where you've got the black on black crime, and you've got gangster rap at its highest peak and things of that nature. And you didn't necessarily want to bring in and further stereotype a black guy being a heel. So you bring him in as a face, and he's, like I said, he's huge and can hold his own. You give him that backstory of escaping from the streets. It's easy for them as a company. You bring him in, you roll that out, and he's the guy. Like, he is immediately put in the same ranking echelons with your Shawn Michaels and your Razor Ramones and all. He's right there being booked right along with them at this time, and he's undefeated at this time. He's not losing. He gets the Intercontinental Championship, and it's a big deal in the summer of '96 that he's the Intercontinental Champion, because for all intents and purposes at that point, this is when the Intercontinental Championship was still, when you got that, you knew this guy was pretty much about to be next in line in some capacity, that he's about to either be challenging for the World Heavyweight Championship or he's about to get it. And Ahmed Johnson had the complete following of that. He looked good. He looked the part. He looked like he would run through the entire WWF on his own. And, injuries kick in. And I think, this is me personally speaking, maybe the lack of promo skills or lack of, being understood based on his drawl of his accent and things of that nature. And things start just falling through the cracks, and not knowing how true it is, but in some circles he's viewed as kind of a headache to work with, or maybe he's not safe in the ring. And it's like, it's getting to the point where you want to invest in this character. All the tools are right there physically and draw wise, because he was a big deal. Fans loved him, and they did, especially because he was in his own way, a charismatic African American man on your television that was able to hold his own, and it was being spun in a positive way. So all the tools are there to make him world champion, but like I said, the instance that he maybe is not too safe to work with in the ring, and the injuries, he couldn't stay on TV because he's always hurt, and then hurt again and hurt again. And then at that point, the wheels kind of come off, and especially coming back from injury, you try to see, can this person regain the momentum they had, and it just seemed like Ahmed could never regain his late 95, 1996 momentum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so that was what stopped him. So had
Mhm.
he won, what would the landscape have looked like in your estimation?
So I think if he wins in '96,
Wait, so actually, who he would have had to beat Sean, right? Or
yes,
Sid?
yeah, yeah,
Either or.
it's either Sean or Sid. I do feel as though your mix, your mix is going to be Ahmed, Brett, and Austin. That's where I think your mix is. Yeah, I know. I feel as though your guy taking the belt off of Ahmed is either Farouk. Again, that's the other person that's mixed in too. You got to mix Farouk in there too, which is Ron Simmons, ironically enough, that we're talking about. Ron Simmons, if he goes this trajectory and is still a big deal and comes to WWF and feuds with Ahmed with the Nation storyline as world champion, you could book that as Farouk, saying Ahmed sold out or whatever way it was going. And he wins the WWF championship. And then it may be, you know what? Now that I'm thinking, as it's lightning striking my brain as I'm saying all of this, you still have Vader in the mix, who's another big guy. Not
Right.
necessarily that takes it off of Ahmed, but that's probably a big feud for Ahmed, is Ahmed and Vader. Like I said, Austin's still on the rise at that point. Brett's on the rise, and you're kind of turning Brett heel. You could go Brett and Ahmed, and Brett gets it, and or transitions off. There's a lot of moving parts here. There really is. There's so many avenues that you could go with Ahmed being world champion. But like I said, I think or shoot, even Ahmed and Triple H. I mean, talk about the two contrasting styles. You have the African American, hardworking, proud man from the street, and you have the Caucasian blue blood that just thinks everything's going to get handed to him in life. So you have a storyline there too. So it there were possibilities with Ahmed as champion in different routes you could go. I think he would have had a lengthy title run just because of the amount of fresh challengers you would have had with him. Granted, we're booking in hindsight 25 years later, and but looking back at it, the opportunities were there.
All right, champ, who you got?
Okay, so once again, I think the centerpiece of both of our selections will be Vader. And my pick was recommended by Vader to get a shot in WCW, and I'm going with Too Cold Scorpio.
Okay.
Once again, looking at the time that you mentioned, he was there between like 92 and 95. And around this time, this is when culturally hip hop started turning the corner, as you mentioned, with gangster rap. And there weren't too many positive images from, I guess if you want to say from the presentation of gangster rap, what have you.
Right.
So basically, Too Cold Scorpio's gimmick was more on like the MC Hammer side, right?
Right. And I think to just jump in really quick with your point, Champ Creed, I think your window is a little shorter than what you're thinking. I think that Too Cold window is actually only about a year and a half.
Probably a year.
Yeah, I think he was gone by 94. Actually.
Yeah, it says he debuted in his debut in World Championship Wrestling was November 18th, late 1992. And he was there until the collision in Korea in 1995.
Was he still there? I think that's what's funny about 94 is that he was sparingly used on TV at that point.
Right. And he was more in ECW in Tokyo under alter ego, the Black Wazuma, right? Now, the thing about Too Cold, just as to me, everyone wants to give Rey Mysterio credit for innovating high flying and aerial maneuvers and high spots, what have you. I'm going to have to say no. Too Cold Scorpio was doing things on American television that we had not seen ever.
Yeah.
We, at that point in time in history, in American pro wrestling, we did not see any professional wrestler with an aerial moveset like Too Cold Scorpio.
Yeah.
In
Especially a
addition to that,
heavyweight. People
right, and
forget that. People
that's what I was
forget
about
that.
to say.
He wasn't, 180 and
No,
flying around. He about 240
six
doing
feet,
this.
240.
All right, and not only that was 240 doing it, but he had the fans were behind him as well. Because when
Right,
we talk about champ, you got to have people behind you. And Too Cold had a following for himself.
right. And the brass over at WCW, they knew that he had a following, so much so they put him in a match against Barry Windham for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, but he lost, unfortunately, at Clash of the Champions. So
Mm-hmm.
you figure that was his moment. I think that Ahmed never got a shot at the World Heavyweight title, did he?
Uh, oh man, you know what? Now that I'm
I don't
thinking
think he
about it,
did.
I don't think he did in WWF. I
No,
really don't think he did.
no, I don't think he
Because
did.
I'm trying to think, did he fight Undertaker at any time in '90s? If he would have gotten a world title shot, it would have been in '97. If he had got one, and I want to say, did he get one in the? He may have gotten one, maybe, but I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't. I'll look it up. I don't think he did. I think you might be right. I don't think he did.
Yeah. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't recall. And that's the difference between Too Cold and Ahmed. That Too Cold
Yeah.
actually got a shot. So you figure if he takes that belt off of Barry Windham in 1993, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
still get the Ron Simmons effect, but it's a different level. Why? Because here you have a Black American heavyweight champion who has wrestled in Japan, who has wrestled in Mexico, who has wrestled around the world. And he's the innovator of aerial offense, which will bring your kids in. Like, because that's the thing. Like, we all watched it growing up, you know, and you know, as a kid, you like your larger than life characters, what have you. But when you saw a guy like him do the things that he did, you were pretty much you stopped in your tracks, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I
Mm-hmm.
just think that if you give Too Cold Scorpio that title in that time frame, right, the landscape changes. In terms of who you would match him up against, I got to pull up the title reigns. Um, you're talking about you can have matches with him in a Great Muda. Great Muda. You can have matches with him and Flair. You
And
can
this
have
is
matches.
for you're saying with Barry Windham's championship, so that would have been what is the NWA World Championship
Right,
/ the WCW International World Heavyweight Championship, which was so dumb. But
right.
Yes,
so you have essentially what you're saying, Champ Creed, is that you're having Too Cold defend under the NWA banner. I just want to make sure I'm following.
Yeah, you can have him because he wrestled in Mexico, because he
Mm-hmm.
wrestled in Japan. You now have someone that can be an ambassador and
Yeah.
carry the belt and wrestle for the NWA belt, wrestle for the WCW belt. Because actually, once Flair got it, it split September 1st, 1993.
Yes.
That's when it split. Flair took it home, right?
Yeah. So what happened is that when Flair came back to WCW when Flair came back to WCW, the NWA Championship, the Big Gold, also
Mm-hmm.
came back to WCW because it had went back under the NWA banner. That's why WCW had that other championship, the other World Championship. They had the
Right.
smaller one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Flair, when he came back, the relationship kind of somewhat repaired itself to where WCW at least got the championship back. I think the NWA started using the old smaller rectangular one
Yes.
again.
Yes.
And
And
Flair
then that
brought
went to Shane Douglas.
yeah, yep. And so Flair, that's when WCW, because they had the physical property of the Big Gold, they
Mm-hmm.
ended up with 2 world championships.
Right.
And if I'm just to further your point with Too Cold, if he's world champion defending under the NWA banner, if he's going to Mexico and things like that, that automatically opens up Too Cold and Benoit, Too Cold
Yep.
and Eddie Guerrero,
Yep.
uh,
Yep. Too
Shane
Cold and
Douglas.
Lionheart. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a and just to even further what your point is, imagine the trajectory of what was defined as that renaissance of the cruiserweight division in WCW in 95 and 96.
Right.
That would have been on the American scene 2 years earlier
Yep.
because you'd have been seen. And not that Too Cold was a cruiserweight, but he moved like one.
Yes.
So that style, we'll call it a style, not necessarily the weight class.
Right.
That cruiserweight style would have been on showcase a year or two before it was even thought of in WCW. So
Right. And then with that, I think that if he's having that level of success, he doesn't end up in WWF as Flash Funk
Oh
right
no,
away.
no, no, not
Right
at all.
away. Yeah, he doesn't end up in WWF
He
because we
doesn't
all
even go
know.
to ECW, let alone.
Yeah.
Well, he may go to ECW, but those rights, as we learned, that, and I know about this, Champ Creed. I think the Tommy Boy rights with Too Cold's character, and then I think WWF ends up buying it out or something like that to get the rights to have him under contract in WWF.
Wait, what
It's
is the
something.
Tommy Boy right? I'm not
Yeah,
familiar with
it's
that.
something where Too Cold's character or something had to deal with Tommy Boy. Let me look it up because
Did he
that's
have
something.
he had a record deal?
No, not a record deal. It was something where something that ECW had in conjunction went with That's how WWF was able to get him. It's something. I'm going to look it up now.
All right. So, and while you're looking that up, I'll continue. So, he stays in WCW, right? But ultimately, like many talents at that time, I see him dropping it to either Flair or Hogan. And I see him getting lost in the shuffle of the NWO. I see him getting fed up. I see his contract expiring. And then I also see, instead of him coming over as Flash Funk, he comes over with Benoit, Guerrero, Malenko, and Saturn. Maybe even without Saturn. But I see he comes over. They were the Radicals, right?
Yes, and I did find what you. Go ahead. I did find what I was talking about. Go ahead.
All right. So break that down before I continue.
Yeah. So this is from that. This is from Paul Heyman. I think this was told on the. It's either Paul Heyman's DVD or the ECW DVD, and he was talking about. This is from Paul Heyman. He said, I never took a check from WWE while I was running ECW. Said in '96 I had a meeting with Vince McMahon, and there was some talent in WWE that he was going to send to ECW and keep on his payroll as long as I could work with these talents and develop them. He said there was some talent in ECW that Vince was looking to bring in to WWE. ECW had a deal with Tommy Boy Records to use some of their music, and every time Two Cold Scorpio was on ECW TV, we put a lower third of his music, and the first commercial would always be an ad by Tommy Boy Records, and for this, Tommy Boy would sponsor ECW to about $1,000 a week. If they were to send Two Cold Scorpio to WWE, ECW would lose the sponsorship, and we'd lose $1,000 a week. And he said Vince says he'll cover the $1,000, just send you, and he'll send you $1,000 a week for the rights to use Too Cold Scorpio. So since that day in September of '96, he said WWE paid ECW $1,000 a week. That's what because I knew it was something. I was like, I know it was something dealing with him. That's what it was.
Okay. All right. He was released in 1994 after failing multiple tests for marijuana, but I don't think that would have been an issue had he been the champion.
No.
I said I feel he comes over with the Radicals, and you have a situation where
comes
Dean
over the
Malenko,
Radicals in 2000.
Wait, yeah,
because Radicals came over in 2000.
They came in 2000. Yeah, I think he stayed because I think if he's gonna win the championship, I think they're gonna lock him into one of those long-term contracts. I don't think.
Now here's where I propose this question to you.
Okay.
What happens to Too Cold Scorpio when Hulk Hogan arrives?
Oh, he drops the belt. That's what I said.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Does he
yeah,
stay though?
yeah. He stays because Hogan brings money,
Right.
right? I think he said because if you win the championship there at that time, right? Hogan is bringing in the money and the exposure, and you really don't want to go to New York right away, right?
Right.
Especially if you see that they're coming out of the steroid situation. Most
Right.
importantly, you see how Vader isn't really liking it up there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
But Vader now, for all intents and purposes, to stay on the timeline, Vader's still there in WCW at this time.
yeah,
Right. He's still in 92. He's there. He's still
no. I'm saying what I'm saying is he wins the
Mhm.
belt, and what was that? 93. He has a run to say maybe 94. Well, Hogan gets over there like late 94, early 95.
Or no, he's there early 94.
He's there early 94.
Yeah.
Okay, where's Vader in 94?
He's in WCW. He's just dropping the world championship at that time.
All right, so Vader's dropping. So actually, let me alter my timeline. If Vader was what, under a 4-year contract with WCW at that time?
Something like that, because he leaves in 95.
He leaves in 90, yeah.
One more factor for you to consider, and then you go ahead and go map your quest out with this. Where does Sting factor in all of this? Because he's the top guy. He is the top guy at this point.
Well, he and that's the thing. He gets lost in the shuffle. When Hogan comes
Sting
over,
does? Ooh, I want to hear this.
No, not Sting. Not Sting. Too cold.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was
Scorpio.
Say, Sting is the man at this point.
Well, yeah, Sting is there, and he becomes a transitional champion. I see him now that you brought up the Vader factor. I think that I don't think that WWF at the time would have had the money to lure him away, because I don't think that they would see him as significant of an acquisition more so than Vader. So WWF, they would have had to pick one. They weren't getting both of them. They had to pick one of them. They would have picked Vader. I think Too Cold stays in WCW. He languishes around the mid-card. NWO begins to start up. I think he languishes some more, but the money is good. I think he moves further down the card. I think he is getting paid, but probably isn't happy. And eventually going towards 2000, I still believe he comes in with the Radicals, right? As he comes in with the Radicals, Dean Malenko didn't really have such a great run at it in WWF, but he got a job. Perry Saturn, not so much. And I don't know what happened to Perry Saturn, to be honest with you. But you have Benoit, Guerrero, and now I think Too Cold becomes a part of that equation. Just because Vince McMahon does have an affinity for Black culture to a certain degree. And I think instead of getting Flash Funk in 1993, I think in 2000, we get Scorpio Clay. We get the Brodus Clay iteration of the character with Too Cold Scorpio in 2000. And then he goes the course of that particular type of character. Eventually, I think he gets released. I see him still doing the indies. And believe it or not, Too Cold Scorpio is still wrestling to this day.
Yeah, he sure is.
He has a championship match in an indie on February 19th of this month. I think it's WPW or something like that. So I think he becomes the first. And because he becomes the first, I always see him being a figurehead in the Royal Rumble every other year. And then I also think he gets one of those redemption angles that Ricky Steamboat got. I think he get when Steamboat came back and he got the "You Still Got It" chance. Too Cold Scorpio is 58 years old. He's still doing 450 splashes, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think he comes back, and then I think he even gets a run. And ultimately, I see him doing something uh, more so like a head coach of the New Day or something like that, what have you. Um, and then I also see him kind of like the way that MVP works with Bobby Lashley. I could see the New Day breaking up, Xavier Woods going heel, and him having Too Cold as his mentor to show him how you get to that height of being a black heavyweight champion. That's my piece.
That was pretty good. I give you. You know, you thought about that thing for a minute.
Yeah.
He worked it out. I'm not mad.
Actually, hold on. Actually, I didn't. I just read it off of Wikipedia right now, but that's how good I am.
You make me edit this out, that part out, right?
No, I'm messing with you.
Nah, but you know, you took both of y'all guys took my first initial picks. You know, Wiz, you took my Ahmed Johnson because that's the easy answer, right?
Yep.
That's the easy answer. You know, Champ, you took my answer with Too Cold Scorpio. Growing up in that era, everybody loved Too Cold Scorpio, right? But I had to really think about it real hard and like who could have made an impact like Ron Simmons did, right? Having some little backstory or a story knowing why Ron was put in that position where Vader and Dusty Rhodes sat, and Vader giving Dusty Rhodes the okay to you know what, when Dusty came to Vader and said, you know what, will you drop it to Ron? Vader like, yeah, sure, no problem. Didn't have any issue with it, right? No issue dropping it to Ron. And in Baltimore, had no problem. Dusty comes up with the idea, and I'm saying that who else could have made an impact like Ron Simmons did, and still we could be talking about today. And the only name that came to my mind was Ron Simmons' former partner,
Butch Reed.
Oh, that wasn't what I was going to say.
And so it came. Butch Reed could have been that guy. If it had not been Ron Simmons, it could have been Butch Reed. If you think about a year earlier, and Wiz, catch me if I'm wrong, Butch Reed wrestled Lex Luger for 2 out of 3, right? And he wrestled Lex Luger for the WCW championship. And I can't remember, it was a Starrcade. It was a pay-per-view. I can't remember, it was Starrcade or wherever it was at. Slammer. But he wrestled Lex Luger. And this is when Butch Reed had the pedigree. Butch Reed had the NFL experience, right? Butch Reed had the physique. Butch Reed had the look. Butch Reed had the presence. Butch Reed had, if you wanted to look at it, he had a manager in Teddy Long. Butch Reed could have been that guy that and people would have followed Butch Reed, the natural Butch Reed, right? He could, and talk about getting on a mic, Butch Reed could talk, right? It was nothing that Butch Reed could not do, right? And if truth be told, he did some things better than Ron Simmons. The problem is Butch had some issues. To me, if it had not been Ron Simmons, it could have been Butch Reed, or should have been Butch Reed a year earlier. And I think Butch Reed would have had a long run, because you could still do some of the feuds that WCW ended up doing with Ron Simmons, right? You could have did Butch Reed and Vader, and that would have been still got a good and great impact, right? You could have did Butch Reed and Sting, and still would have made money, right? Yep. You could have did the natural Butch Reed versus the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, right? And still would have shut the house down. So Butch Reed should have been that guy. But there were some things that they didn't want to pull the trigger on Butch Reed, because he wasn't all-American boy, right? He had the better pedigree than Ron Simmons, but he wasn't clean enough like Ron was, right? Butch had a little edge to him. Butch he didn't take too much from anybody backstage. Butch was very outspoken. And so they gave it to Ron in that sense, but it could have really been Butch Reed, and I think Butch Reed could have ran with it. Would have set WCW on fire at the time.
So
if you reverse the roles, right? Because we know Butch Reed turned on Ron Simmons and made Ron Simmons a babyface in Doom. But if Ron would have turned on Butch Reed, and Butch Reed would have been the babyface to take on a Vader in 1992, or Butch Reed would have took on a Luger earlier, Butch Reed could have been that guy that we talking about today. Butch Reed could be that guy that could have been in the WWE Hall of Fame. Matter of fact, I take it one further. You could still put Butch Reed in APA and it would still work if he had went to WWF, WWE. And see, you not only could give Butch Reed the WCW championship, but you could give Butch Reed the WWF championship, and people will still buy into it and believe it, because he was a champion world champion almost everywhere he went, except for those two companies.
Right. You're right.
And we know how much he was going to get. He was going to get the Intercontinental Championship, but he just no-showed. Right? They was going to put this on Butch Reed, so that means they had faith in him to be the worker, like you talking about Ahmed. The Intercontinental Championship just wasn't thrown on anybody back then.
Right.
The Intercontinental, if you got the Intercontinental Championship, or if it was thrown on you or given to you, you were somebody in the WWE. Excuse me. That was like the second championship, right? That was meant to being the world champion. If you were the IC champ, you was going to be in a title picture somewhere, or they was talking about you every week because you were that guy. And so Ron Simmons could have very well been the man.
Yeah,
he could have been that guy that we're talking about today as being the first African American champion. If it had not been Ron Simmons, I believe it should have been Butch Reed.
Now, let's take it a step further, we could have maybe had a world champion before Ron Simmons was even in the picture in the other company in WWF, because you could have had Bad News Brown win it.
Yeah, if we going backwards, right? If we going backwards, I give it before then. And I know it might not have ever happened. You could have gave it to JYD.
Yeah.
See,
you can come off from mute, champ. JYD's one. Like I said, Bad News Brown's one for sure.
Yes.
Ernie Ladd is another.
Yes.
There's quite a few that, and if I'm not mistaken, isn't there an argument out there about Bobo Brazil being the first Black World Heavyweight Champion?
Here's the argument that Bobo won it or was going to win it, and he technically won it, but he gave it back or got pinned right after. It was some stipulation where he won it, but then he lost it in the same night, and it wasn't televised. They didn't count it because they knew at the time if he'd have kept the championship, they wouldn't gonna like that. They couldn't get out of town. He wouldn't get out of town that night, right? And so Buddy Rogers didn't let it happen that way, but it was the thing for Bobo Brazil to get it. Big Cat Ernie Ladd could have been had it, right? Ernie Ladd could have did it down good and had the pedigree, the intelligence, the education, everything they looked for in an NWA champion, even when he came to WWF. I'm gonna take you there. And he could have had it. JYD was over more so than Hulk Hogan in the 80s.
Right.
Everybody loved the Junkyard Dog, right? It's sad that Junkyard Dog was way over, but never won a championship in WWE.
Yeah.
But if it had not been Ron Simmons, it could have easily been one of them. That could have had it. But I think Butch Reed, for the era we're talking about, and if you want to go, somebody say, well, all the picks before Ron Simmons, do you have a pick after Ron Simmons? I would have to go with like one of you guys. I would have to go, if it was talking about during that same era in the 92, 95 era, I would have to go with Ahmed. But we're talking about beforehand, it is definitely to me is Butch Reed could have did the exact same thing, and even more so, in my opinion, than Ron Simmons.
Hold on, yo. Seth has the move. Seth's move's called the Falcon Arrow, the aerial move off the top rope. What is it called?
No, the Falcon Arrow is the suplex, kind of like slam. The Phoenix Splash is the rotating 450.
Too Cold Scorpio is 57 years old, executing Phoenix Splashes.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Just I'm like, I've always appreciated him, but like, doing this particular project on the What If made me appreciate him more. And I hope our listeners listen to this to get a bit of history and appreciate everyone that we mentioned, because listen, all three scenarios really make sense. Makes you ponder, what if?
Yeah, you wonder what if? What if it had not been? I'm gonna ask you guys this question. If it had not been Ron Simmons, and let's say Ahmed didn't pan out, how long would we have waited? And I know we can come back to Corey, the Wizards, The Rock, right? And everybody don't count The Rock. I do count The Rock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say if you did not count The Rock, what year or what time frame will we have had the African American champion
Ooh,
if it had not been Ron Simmons in 1992 or Ahmed Johnson?
I
And you
think so I'll say this. I think for the sake of PR, but it depends on when. If it's the Attitude Era, then maybe. But if it's somewhere around there, like I mentioned, first person I mentioned before, Ahmed Johnson. If Charles Wright, I think, is booked as comma or maybe as Godfather in '98 or so, there's an opportunity for some kind of quick world title. I really think he had enough behind him
He
and
had
enough
enough
of a
locker room.
stature
Yeah. He had enough
and
locker
respect.
room respect that they could have gave him like a month run with it or something.
Yep. I think that's the one because he was such a company guy and just he did his thing so well at the position he was. It was I really think Kama as the supreme fighting machine could have been world champion. I really do.
I'll give you one, and it's kind of cheating. If Ron Simmons doesn't win it in '92 in WCW, then Farouk, the leader of the Nation of Domination, wins it later on in WWF.
Yeah, that's one. Yeah, I agree with that. I do. I do.
Because of the landscape of the group, the faction, where we was at in the time period, with the fight the power, the whole black movement.
Yeah. The hip hop culture emerged in the '90s, and it just was that was the de facto go to for any booker if they had black talent coming in, and you couldn't really
Right.
do too much wrong with it.
So yeah. So cheat wise, Ron Simmons still wins. Ron Simmons wins it. If he didn't win in '92, and we can't go back to '91 to Butch Reed, Ron Simmons wins it in what '95, '96 in WWE, WWF.
I agree with that one. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, no, yeah. I definitely agree with that. Same.
All right. Last point before we get out of here. Give me your theory on why people do not want to accept The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, as the first African American champion in WWE. All right, because we know Ron Simmons is the first African American champion overall. Why don't folks want to accept Ron Simmons as the first? I mean, excuse me, The Rock as the first African American champion in WWE.
I think it's because his lineage is first trotted out there as a Samoan. Just as simple as that. He is his heritage is built out there as the Rock comes from the. Yes, they do mention Rocky Johnson. They have to. They mention High Chief Peter Maivia, but he's always linked with the Anoa'i family, which is Samoan. He's always linked there because of the lineage of what that family has produced in the sport of professional wrestling. Because he's linked in that family and him being The Rock and how successful he was, it's always linked to that, the world famous NY family from, of professional wrestling, and they're Samoan. He's always linked to that. It's always like the Rocky Johnson connection is always mentioned next after the NY family connection. It's always mentioned second. And so in people's minds, because of how it's put out there, he's Samoan and then black, as if you get what I'm saying.
Right.
So yeah, that's why I think it's always, it's so many people don't view it as him being, the first African American World Heavyweight Champion because of the other half of his bloodline, no pun intended,
Right.
but the other half of his bloodline being Samoan is so heavily trotted out and it's so heavily touted that it's always viewed as half and half and not that he's African American also.
Right. And you have to go off the simple as this. He grew up in Hawaii and Harlem.
Yeah.
When he had hair, his hair didn't look like Booker T's hair or Stevie Ray's hair. It looked like Rikishi's hair. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
How he was trotted out with his first outfit, it was the marketing and the branding of the lineage, you know? So that's why. And look, I say it, yes, he is considered a black heavyweight champion because his dad is black, his mother is Simone, right? It's simple as that with me. I can understand people, not saying that, oh, he's this and that. But to me, in my estimation, I say that he is, and other people may not see it as so because of what the Wiz just mentioned and what I just said in the beginning. If he was born in Harlem, it'd have been different, but he wasn't.
Not only if he was born in Harlem, I think you said it, is the way that WWE introduced him to us.
Yeah.
They introduced him as Rocky Maivia, right? Not Rocky Johnson Jr. You know what I'm saying?
Right. No, you're absolutely right.
They put us as Rocky Maivia. So if they would have they would introduce him as Rocky Johnson Jr., then we would have seen him as being that African American. He came out there, started doing the Ali shuffle in the middle of the ring. You know what I'm saying? That was some things that we would have perceived him, or fans would have perceived him as such. But again, even though you put him in the nation, we'll try to connect him with his, I want to use blackness, right? Because that's what it was. All right. He became the Versace guy, but you still looked at him as being the Samoan guy that was in there with everybody else. So we see him as the African American champion because we wanted a champion to be African American in WWE, right? Because you hadn't had it. You had Ron Simmons in WCW. You wanted one in WWE until you got somebody else that came along, i.e. Kofi Kingston. Now you have Big E. You have Bobby Lashley. So that whole argument, you guys, I think when people's like, when I look in the mirror, I want to see somebody who looks like me. And I think that's one of the things people say, you know what, The Rock can't be that way because he talks different or he looks different. Well, guess what? As Champ, you said it. His daddy's African American. His mama is
No, I said his daddy black.
His daddy black.
His daddy black.
His daddy's black, right? And his mama's Samoan. So at the end of the day, that's what we got.
Yep.
We got. Hey, fellas, we just want to thank you for joining us, man. I think this was a good, interesting topic. What if? We'll catch us in a couple of weeks. We'll bring out another what if. We want to keep doing these because there's a lot to talk about in the world of professional wrestling. What if this transpired, or what if that didn't happen? You can always follow us on social media at WMOE Podcast. You can always hit us up on Instagram, Twitter, wherever you get your social media. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our podcast episodes. As always, Wizard, it's always a pleasure to have you, Champ. Appreciate your insight, sir. Wizard, take us home.
Hey, if you're not confirmed, consider yourself denied.
End the story, ladies and gentlemen. Good night, and catch you next week.